Good morning, DawgNation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. I trust that you all had a great weekend. Nice weather yesterday. How about that? Mild conditions on a Sunday here in the state of Georgia. We've got a fun way to start the week. We'll have Chip Towers in the program in just a couple of minutes. We'll welcome him back to DawgNation after a week off from last week. We'll also start our program today talking a lot about Demetris Robertson, why I think that this young man, worth the hype, worth the wait, maybe for UGA, and I'm going to try to speak Instagram today, which is not something I always do very well, but it could lead to some good news for UGA in terms of what it means for incoming freshman running back James Cook. We'll explain it all coming up as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It would certainly appear that things are really heating up when it comes to UGA recruiting. This is apparently going to be a busy next few days as we start to get really curious about what a few big-time UGA recruiting targets might do. Maybe nobody bigger here over the course of the next week than the former five-star wide receiver Demetris Robertson, who chose Cal over Georgia back in 2016. Remember, that recruitment sort of extended itself beyond National Signing Day in February into the spring. I think it was like early May when Robertson finally made his announcement for Cal over Georgia. It was the kind of thing that we paid a lot of attention to here around DawgNation in those weeks and months leading up to that choice for Robertson in May. He goes to Cal. That decision doesn't really stick. Now he wants to leave. He's already told us that he's going to transfer here. And now we know a little bit more of the details about the transfer. Chiming In Media, which is the company that apparently that Robertson has sort of partnered with here for the recruitment video, commitment video for the transfer, which is sort of a new threshold to cross over in recruiting altogether. But nonetheless, Chiming In Media has, pardon the pun here, chimed in to let us know what the future of Robertson is going to look like. Here's what they put out on social media. If you're watching, you'll be able to see this on your screen, that it's going to go down on Saturday, July 14th, the commitment video for Demetris Robertson. The most important news, though, here is that the four finalists for Robertson, as noted by Chiming In Media, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and West Virginia. Now, when it comes to these four finalists, you know, it's sort of easy to understand a couple of these. Jake Spavital, who is at West Virginia now, was at Cal. There's obviously a coaching relationship that Robertson would have with West Virginia. That's why they may be in consideration here. Georgia, easy to understand, given the fact they were a finalist for Robertson services back in 2016. I'll admit the Texas tie here is one that's a little bit harder for me to figure out. The Alabama tie is one for me that's a little bit harder to figure out. But at least in the case of West Virginia and Georgia for Robertson, there's some pretty easy evidence to point to why he'd be considering those schools. And Alabama and Texas is either because of some new relationship that's been established or just really big programs and can get some more attention for the Chiming In Media video, depending on your perspective on that. That's how those four finalists kind of come together here. And yes, I know how many of you feel about this. Many of you say, yeah, Robertson may be a good player, but come on, BA, I'm so tired of this. I was tired of this in 2016. I'm tired of this now. I'm not sure I love the idea of commitment videos for a transferring player. All of this for many of you just seems like too much. I do grant that. And, you know, to each his own when it comes to that kind of stuff. I sort of had said before that I kind of like the theater and the drama. I kind of like some of that kind of stuff. I think it's sort of fun, which is what all this is supposed to be. But I sort of understand why some of you are kind of turned off to this a little bit. It is worth pointing out here, though, and I think this is really important, that while this may seem like a lot of, to use sort of a weird word, a lot of hullabaloo, this may seem like, too much theater, too much drama, just too much, some people may even say silliness. I do get that. It's important to remember that Demetris Robertson, the former five-star player here, may just be as a prospect a player that is worth the wait and worth the drama and worth all the sort of extra attention that he's going to garner for himself here. He may just be good enough to make it be that Georgia fans ought to ride this wave out for another week and find out exactly where Robertson goes. Now, if he leaves Georgia at the altar one more time, then yeah, there's going to be some frustration here. But let's not act like this is a player that Georgia doesn't need. I believe that Demetris Robertson, an elite wide receiver who proved that in the one full season he played at Cal, is the kind of player that Georgia could definitely use. And you know what? Kirby Smart seems to agree about that himself. Back in 2016, he was allowed to talk about Robertson, even though Robertson was a prospective student athlete, because Robertson had signed his grant and aid papers. That sort of opened up Kirby Smart to be free to discuss him. And Smart made no bones at the time about discussing why it was they were recruiting him so hard. It was the unusual combination of speed and athleticism that Robertson brought to the table. In fact, here is how Kirby Smart talked about that back in 2016.
Fast. We need speed. But, he's a really talented player that we've obviously recruited really hard. I've had a relationship with the kid since his 9th grade year, recruiting him at Alabama, and then coming here and continuing to recruit him. Coach Schumann's had a good relationship with him. So we think a lot of him talent-wise. He actually at times wanted to be a DB. And sometimes he goes back and forth on that. But he is a talented, fast guy, 10'5", 10'4", 100-meter guy that can really stretch the field. He's a competitor now. They tossed the ball to him in high school. So, he could get back there and do a lot of things that Coach Chaney used. Even when he was at Pitt and when he was at Tennessee, he used guys a lot of ways to get him the ball. So, he's a feature player.
The defensive-minded coach Kirby Smart there talks about, hey, sometimes Demetris Robertson even thinks about wanting to play defensive back, as Jeff Santel's explained to us recently here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. That might not be too much of a consideration for him anymore. He truly is a wide receiver now, and I was doing some research on this before the program started. If you'll pardon me, I want to read some notes here for just a moment. Robertson as a wide receiver, the sort of rarefied air that he's in when it comes to five-star guys. Back in 2015, there were only a total of five-star players in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. In 2016, D-Rob was the only five-star receiver in America, once again, according to 24/7. In 2017, there were 4 five-star receivers. In 2018, there were 4 five-star receivers. And so far for 2019, there are a total of 5 five-star receivers, at least currently classified according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. So that's the last 5 recruiting cycles. Now, if you look at those last 5 recruiting cycles, only 4 schools in the last half-decade have had more than one of those five-star receivers. Clemson, Alabama, LSU, and USC. Only 4 schools have had more than one five-star receiver in the last 5 years. If Georgia could get Robertson on Saturday and also hold on to the commitments of Jaden Hazelwood and Dominic Blaylock, 2 2019 kids, that'll give Georgia 3 wide receivers for what we assume might be the 2019 class alone here for Georgia, given the fact that's when I'm assuming that that Robertson's going to be eligible there. That puts Georgia right there behind just Clemson, who's had 4 five-star receivers over that same span. Now, Clemson's a pretty good comparison to draw here, given the fact that Clemson's been in, the last 3 college football playoffs? So it's elite programs that are bringing in multiple five-star wide receivers. That's what Georgia has a chance to do, and from that standpoint, I think that Robertson represents huge, huge value to UGA. As I said before, it seems like Kirby Smart agrees. Kirby Smart, back in 2016, also talked about the pitch they were making to Robertson in order to get him to UGA. Here's a little more from Kirby from back then.
I feel like we've been pitching it for a long time, man. Just keep pitching and pitching. But, we think we got a great product here to sell. We got really great academics, and, he's talked about using engineering as a way to go on. I think a big sell for me was to go back and look at the guys I played with in the mid to late 90s that didn't make the NFL rosters. That was a big selling point of the book. I don't want to hear about, Hines Ward or Robert Edwards or, whoever the pro first round. To tell me how the guys were doing that didn't make it in the NFL. So we did a really intensive study and went through and found guys that were really successful and doing well in different fields. And I think, that was a good sales pitch for him because he gets it now.
Maybe that will be what works on him. Maybe if he didn't quite get that in 2016, he will get that here in the summer of 2018. You also hear Kirby Smart say, when it comes to Demetris Robertson back in 2016, boy, it feels like we've been pitching him for a long time. As I said before, I know a lot of Georgia fans feel that way, but when you have a chance to add this kind of talent to a crop of wide receivers that's going to look really good a couple seasons from now, it's the hard work, I think, that's just necessary to be done to make Georgia as good as it can be. But wait, that's not all. The Demetris Robertson news that sort of breaks here over the weekend about his upcoming commitment video dropping this upcoming Saturday, not the only big news. You also hear Jermaine Johnson, one of the nation's top junior college players, weigh in. He's a defensive lineman, I guess currently classified as a weak side defensive lineman. He's only about 240 pounds right now. But as Jeff Sintel has told us both here on DawgNation Daily and in his Sintel Intel, Johnson's a bit of a recruiting target for UGA. This is one to watch, and Johnson gives us a bit of a cryptic message here on social media as well. Once again, if you're watching, let me show you this. If you're listening, I'll read it to you. Jermaine Johnson says, I'm going to be making my commitment very soon, ... What does that mean? Well, I won't pretend to know here when it comes to Jermaine Johnson, but I do know this. Like clockwork, our buddy Jeff Sintel, it seems like this always happens with him and other recruiting reporters. You know, these guys work hard 51 weeks out of the year. They try to cobble off 1 week for vacation, and all of a sudden all heck breaks loose in terms of the Demetris Robertson video, Jermaine Johnson saying what he's saying. I guess you got Warren McClendon kind of in the mix here a bit as well. It is certainly heating up, and I think that's the bottom line of this entire discussion. We have talked before about the restless nature of UGA recruiting fans. It happened last summer, and it all worked out fine. This summer almost seemed like a duplication of that once again. Where are the defensive line recruits? Where are the big 4-star, 5-star additions to this class? It seems like Georgia fans have had to wait more than they're comfortable waiting. Well, the wait may be over here in a lot of regards. Over the course of the next few days, next couple of weeks, there could be a lot of good UGA recruiting news to add to what's already looking like a pretty impressive class for 2019. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza and available, well, in just a lot of different platforms here. You can watch us on video 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook page, the DawgNation YouTube page. We're live on the DawgNation Twitter feed as well, and we're glad you're with us there for those of you who like watching the show. If you like listening to the show, you know what? We try to be accessible for you there, too. On the radio at noon, with our friends in the Classic City on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. I am a big 960 The Ref fan, and I love being on the radio there each and every day. Also in podcast form, wherever podcasts can be found. Apple devices, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We just want you to be able to find DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza, and we're glad you're with us today. And really thankful to Marco's Pizza making it all possible. You know, this is a great weekend to take advantage of Marco's Pizza. My family went to the park yesterday in the evening. You know, really nice temperatures, almost like a spring or a fall day, not a super hot summer day. So you imagine get that picnic going and sitting back, relaxing, enjoying a little Marco's Pizza, especially at a great offer. You know, you can say hello primo right now with 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. That's a great offer with real, authentic Italian pizza made every store, every day, the Italian way. Go to Marcos.com. You can find more about the Marcos closest to you and how you can take advantage of this offer yourself. 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. It is great to have Marcos Pizza as a part of DawgNation Daily each and every day. All right, Chip Tower's coming up in a moment. Before we get to that, I'm going to risk doing something here that may make me look like a fool. Many of you know, especially those of you that follow me on social media, I am not the most, I guess, fluent when it comes to social media. Half the time I can't even follow the comments in our comment section live on video. I am not the most super active Twitterer, although I guess I'm trying to do a little bit better job at that. I'm just sort of, I don't know, I guess sort of a behind the times when it comes to that kind of stuff. I don't know a ton about Instagram necessarily, but I am being told here that the latest stuff from James Cook, the incoming freshman running back to UGA on Instagram, signifies good news here. We talked last week about what looked to be some social media stuff from him leaving Fort Lauderdale, the airport close to his home, flying to Athens, Georgia here, and it seems to now we have even more confirmation that Cook is right there in Athens, Georgia, where a lot of Georgia fans hoped he would be. You may remember there had been some online chatter about him kind of dragging behind here a bit in terms of getting into the, into campus and all things sort of squared away here. Let me show you a few of these Instagram story pictures from James Cook that seem to show him right here in Athens having a good time. First of all, there he is with Zamir White. They're a buddy-buddy, what looks to be either a lake or a pool. They're kind of standing on some sort of float there. So he's looking happy right there. And that tandem of White and Cook together certainly gets a lot of UGA fans feeling very optimistic and feeling very good. That seems to be good news. There's another pic from the Instagram story here from James Cook where he's sort of shouting out Cade Mays, another incoming freshman, the 5-star offensive lineman. We will show you that here from Cook on Cade Mays, saying, y'all give my boy Cade Mays a follow. Cade Mays appears to be sitting in some sort of Cessna aircraft. I'm not quite sure what the backstory is on that. But once again, to see Cook palling around with some Georgia incoming freshmen, once again, that seems to be good news for UGA fans. And then there's this, one more image here from the Instagram story. It appears to be either a classroom, a UGA football meeting room. James Cook, he's got an emoji up there with his, hand over his forehead, signifying that's a place right now he doesn't really want to be, maybe, which is sort of the typical feeling of the typical college student. And the fact that James Cook now looks like the typical college student, I think to a lot of UGA fans, end up feeling like pretty good news here. I can't help but think about this and think about the role that that Cook may play for Georgia this season. It actually reminds me back at DawgNation Appreciation, we had a chance to catch up with Terrence Edwards, the former UGA wide receiver. At the time, Edwards was talking about how much he liked James Cook. Now, underneath this quote from Cook, you got a little hip-hop music going here, which is sort of the background from DawgNation Appreciation, but the words from Edwards still ring out appropriately. Here is Terrence Edwards bragging on James Cook.
I love James Cook. I love his speed, his change of direction. I kind of compare him to Keith Marshall, his exceptional speed, his breakaway speed.
So he loves James Cook, the breakaway speed, the exceptional speed. The comparison there to Keith Marshall is also one I think the UGA fans are going to enjoy, and maybe more important than anything, the fact that Cook appears to be in Athens may be the best news of all for a lot of Georgia fans who are listening in or watching here today on Marco's Pizza's presentation of DawgNation Daily. I've actually got more on James Cook that we'll get to in a little bit later on. For like the 9th day in a row, I'm running super late here. So we'll do more of the James Cook stuff with some other sort of evaluations of Cook a little later on in the program. For now, though, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, let me first of all say it's great to have you with us and say, hope you enjoy Chip Towers right now. And we will get Chip coming up in just a moment here as he's checking in from the road where he's on the beat and on the trail here today. So we'll look forward to getting a lot from Chip Towers here in just a moment when he is ready to go with us. As I said, I had some more audio on James Cook that I wanted to play for you right there. The truth is, I've just gotten where I'm running late half the time here, so I was running a little bit late right there, and we'll push that back a little bit later in the program as part of our Dog Day Q&A coming up in just a little later on. Let me also say this. It's going to be really fun in a few minutes when we do our SEC through. Many of you know that here on this program, I believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator hater first and foremost, and that's partially when we have our unofficial mascot for DawgNation Daily, Eddie, who, by the way, continues to wear his hard cast in solidarity with Jake Fromm, who apparently is not wearing a hard cast on his broken hand, suffered last week in the boating incident, but nonetheless, Eddie's got his on. And Eddie's presence here is to remind us that he is a Gator hater first and foremost, and here on this program, we are as well. I've got some really fun recruiting stuff that involves Florida. If you're a UGA fan and a Gator hater, you're going to really like this coming up in a moment. For now, though, Chip Towers is ready to roll, so let's talk to him, and, of course, it's good to have you with us as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me say hello to Chip Towers here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Chip, it's great to have you back on the program. I know you're busy out and about on the beat here today. We appreciate you spending some time with us and hope you're doing well after a little time off for the 4th of July last week.
I am great, and where should I end up on the day I come back from vacation is, at the Oconee course at Ritz-Carlton Lodge on Lake Oconee. Unfortunately, I'm not playing. I'm not a big-time celebrity who has offered a whole bunch of money to Bruce Arians' very, very fine charity event down here. It's a wonderful thing that enables, it helps foster kids. But we're still waiting on Kirby down here. Imagine that. Kirby wasn't early for the media opportunity down here, but Mike Griffith, who's also, officially starting on DawgNation today, is dutifully waiting for him at the celebrity check-in area, and we'll have some news of some sort later today on DawgNation about that. But just got through talking to Shane Beamer, of all people, which was really interesting. Yeah, he was very interesting. He's up in Mount Oklahoma, and had some funny things to say about, having to go back and look at that Rose Bowl film with his players in the tight end room, and he's very outspoken, and he actually defended Lincoln Riley a little bit, on those recent statements, downplayed it certainly as you would expect, and said that everybody who has any sense about him knows what he meant about that, about that the leagues are just different. They run more plays in the Big 12 and all that kind of stuff. But he's here with his father, Frank Beamer, of course, and they are actually really the original family, along with George O'Leary and Ralph Friedgen, who brought all these coaches and many coaches in the pro and college ranks live down here on Lake Oconee, and I guess they're probably members here at the elite Oconee course at Ritz-Carlton Lodge.
Yeah, I mean, how many times over the years, Chip, did you deal with some Frank Beamer related rumors at UGA because of that property he owned in Oconee County? As you said, now that's not unique anymore, but back in the day when Georgia might either be on the verge of a coaching search or going through a coaching search, Frank Beamer was one of those names that popped up because of this notorious house that he has there on Oconee County. As it stands now, a lot of these coaches make their summer homes here in Georgia around these various lakes.
That's right. It's beautiful down here, and they really were the very first. Him and O'Leary and Friedgen. There was really nothing else down here. You didn't even have the Oconee course or the Ritz-Carlton Lodge. You had the Reynolds Plantation up the road, and I think the old Port Armor was here when he first came down. So in a way, you could say he started it, and of course he's good friends with Friedgen and O'Leary as well.
All right, so you mentioned the Oklahoma stuff with Lincoln Riley. I don't think we've heard you weigh in on that yet. Coming up in a couple of minutes, I want to do that. But if you don't mind, let me start here with something else. And this is sort of off your beat a bit. It's kind of veering more towards the recruiting stuff, but I still think you're going to have an interesting take on this. On Saturday, the former five-star wide receiver, Demetris Robertson, who is transferring from Cal, is going to release his latest commitment, I guess, his latest commitment video on that. And the point that I was making before you joined us, Chip, is regardless of whether or not Robertson chooses Georgia or not, and regardless of the Georgia fans who are sort of, tired of histrionics here, they've waited on Robertson a lot in the past. It sounds like they're going to wait a bit more, and there's going to be more attention garnered during the course of that wait. I simply view Robertson as a player worth the wait and worth the trouble for Georgia. He would give Georgia, along with expected signees Jaden Hazelwood and Dominic Blaylock, 3 5-star wide receivers in the roster together by 2019. And when you look at how Georgia sort of missed in recruiting the wide receiver position over the last few years, that's a huge level of talent upgrade compared to where sort of typical Georgia wide receiving cores have been. This is one of the position groups where I think that Georgia has been a little slow establishing its talent dominance. But if you bring in a guy like Robertson, who proved in his one healthy year at Cal what a good player he can be, I mean, that's a big-time get for Kirby Smart if it does go down this upcoming weekend, right?
Well, it is. Yeah, there's no question about that. And we've seen it from Kirby to this point. He just seems to succeed when it comes to these type of things. And this, I think this would be big for all those reasons as you said initially, Brandon, in that, Georgia has struggled some on keeping great wide receivers at home, and I don't know why, because Georgia's always been a pro-style offense, and while they're, run-oriented first, they still throw the ball, throw it well, and throw it down the field, and that's always been a mystery to me, especially, when they end up at there's some real spread stuff like over at Auburn and stuff like that. So to me, and how Kirby takes this, the recruiting competition side of it is big in that regard. Now, I'm not convinced that Demetris Robertson is going to be this, dynamic, dramatic difference maker, coming to Georgia's receiver. I mean, granted, 776 yards in the Pac-12 as a freshman was very impressive. I don't know the deep details of what all his transfer stuff is, if he'll even be successful on a hardship and getting a hardship and being immediately available. I think it certainly helped a hardship case more if he comes to Georgia, and I guess to some degree Alabama, in terms of making a hardship case. But that all said, it's just I'm not convinced that what he did in the Pac-12 automatically translates to what he could do in the SEC. All that said, he is what he is. He's a great receiver. I could understand some Georgia segment of the population being a little jaded to the recruiting histrionics. But, it is what it is. And clearly this is a guy who enjoys that process, or he wouldn't be playing this the way he's playing it. So, we're all, it's July 14th, I think it is, right? That we all have circled on our calendar and waiting to see what happens. But, I don't see it as a needle mover, in 2018, just right now on first blush. I don't see it as that.
Let me tell you what this makes me think of, just to kind of follow up on your comments. And I think you and I have spoken about this before. I think there's going to be a bit of a spotlight on Georgia here in 2018, whether Robertson comes to Georgia and were to be eligible in 2018 or not. I think there's going to be a spotlight to see, does Georgia add more of the passing offense into its repertoire? We know that it can pass. When Jake Fromm was called upon last year, he sort of, no pun intended, pass that test every single time, but in terms of as a percentage of the overall play calling or a percentage of the overall yards collected, seeing Georgia throw the ball this year more may be crucial for the future generations of Demetris Robertsons or the guys like Jaden Hazelwood who may be taking a bit of a wait-and-see approach based on some of the visits that he's taken as of late. Showing off the extra dimension of the Georgia offense here this season is going to be important for Jim Chaney and Kirby Smart, right?
Yeah, I think they want to do that. I think Georgia's offense overall, whether it's totally pass offense or totally spread, if we're witnessing a transformation at this point, like we did at Alabama to some degree in the last few years, remains to be seen. But I think there's a lot. It feels like a lot of transition on the offensive side of the ball. Not only do you have James Coley as offensive coordinator, Jim Chaney moving out to tight end at a different position than Shane Beamer. I'll write some stuff about this later on DawgNation, but had some interesting, really, really complimentary stuff. He talked about, how Jim Chaney really taught him a lot about the position when he first came to Georgia as a tight ends coach. And I think for Georgia overall, it's a big transition year. And obviously, that's obvious when you lose two backs you combine for 8,000 yards or whatever it was in their careers. So, it's a big year in that regard. But yes, I think just the fact that you already have Hazelwood and Blaylock, on the hook, as it were, they're going to continue to play the game. But it's about this time of year, really, that Georgia has been getting it done in recruiting under Kirby. From July to the beginning of football season in camp, because a lot of these big time guys, they want to get that decision behind them before they go into their senior years. And so I expect a lot of activity. And, whether Demetris Robertson is part of that or not remains to be seen. But I expect a lot of drama and, actually, to be honest, a lot of headway over the next month for sure.
Chip, you came back off vacation last week to do some reporting on Jake Fromm's boating accident injury, the non-throwing hand and the fracture that he suffered there. We haven't really heard you weigh in on that too much, though. What were your overall thoughts on that? I will say for me personally, as a fan, I'm speaking as a fan, my one concern might be that the groundswell of folks saying, oh, there's nothing to worry about, this is going to be fine. I think all that depends on how well this fracture heals based on the research that I've done on this. And I guess there is still that held breath on the part of Georgia fans saying, hopefully this doesn't, heal improperly and he's still dealing with this once practice begins there at the beginning of August. Have you had a chance to sort of think much about this? And what are your thoughts on the Fromm injury, the way it goes down?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot. I got a few things, a few things I feel about it. First off, I don't agree with any argument that starts with these players shouldn't be, on a boat on a lake. They really have very small windows of time that they have time for this kind of extracurricular activity. And you knew when Fromm signed with Georgia that he was going to be on the lake and in and hunting blinds and on boats. That's just what the kid does. And it's freak accident from all the indications that I get. He puts his left hand in. He put his give him credit. He put his left hand up to shield his face, from a flying handle, and it just hit him in a spot, whatever, little navicular bone or whatever's down there. But as the cynical, jaded journalist, also, I don't automatically buy. What else are they going to say? The Fromm camp and the Georgia camp, but he's going to be fine. That's all you're ever going to hear anyway. But I do believe, by and large, the people that I've talked to, that this is not a season-altering type of injury. Now we'll see. There's precedent for quarterbacks being bothered by non-throwing hand injuries. Obviously, there's a lot of shotgun involved, getting under center, a lot of ball work, hand work. Georgia does a lot of zone read stuff. Then there's just protection of it, and how's that going to change things? If you got to carry protection on into the season, we'll find all those things out in due time. But yeah, I don't think it's as cut and dry that he's going to be fine. And I certainly don't think it's a season-altering situation.
The other thing that kind of goes down last week was the dust up over what Lincoln Riley says during a radio interview. Of course, Riley, the Oklahoma coach, saying that Georgia's defense would not be top 5 if it played in the Big 12 every single year. And the conventional wisdom, Chip, kind of has been here that if you hear the full context of Riley's answer and not just the tweet that was sent out by Danny Cannell, who's a bit of a professional troll as it is, the conventional wisdom is that the full context of the Riley answer sort of changes everything. I said last week on the show, though, that, and we played the full audio of the Riley answer here on this show, Chip, it doesn't change everything for me necessarily based on my initial assessment of what Riley had to say there. It does come across as the sort of, hey, look at us. We scored a bunch of points in a loss versus Georgia type talk. And more important than that for me, Chip, is it sort of really gets to what the underlying issue on this entire subject is, which is the sort of Big 12 way of football in comparison to the SEC way of football and the sort of internal strife that goes on, both in terms of negative recruiting and just in terms of, media chatter about which brand of football is better, what the Big 12 does, which is thought to be more innovative, what the SEC does, which is thought to be more physical and tougher. I mean, for me, that's ultimately the real issue here. Obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts, though.
Well, look, this is all about philosophy, and I buy it for what it's worth. I do. I mean, when's the last time the Big 12 has produced a top 5 defense? Period. I mean, I don't think they ever do, and for whatever reason, that's where that league has landed. In the grand scheme of things. But I also think that the Kirby formula and the quite frankly, the longtime Georgia formula and the Saban formula is more of a successful formula in the grand scheme of things, and it requires a balance on both sides of the ball, and generally you can be more successful in the long run if you do that. And look, this is what happened to Oklahoma against Georgia is befallen Oklahoma a bunch. But at the end of the day, Lincoln Riley is a young, brash coach, and that's something that I think a young, brash coach would say, but that an older, more veteran coach wouldn't say. Because things can get taken out of content and more or context, and more than ever nowadays, the media, as it were, quotes around that is just waiting to pounce on anything like that you can find. So it's I take it with a grain of salt. And I thought Shane put a good perspective. I'll have more on that later. He had a really interesting perspective, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with our readers a little bit later.
Let me squeeze in one quick final question before we let you go. SEC Media Days is next week. Kirby Smart going to be one of the central figures there, given the fact that he's the reigning SEC champion, or at least he coaches the team, that is. What do you think the big storylines and talking points for SEC Media Days next week are going to be?
Well, we're in it. You're right, BA, and we're excited about it. The SEC Media Days are actually in Atlanta this year for the first time in history. I've covered these. I don't even want to say how long I've covered these, but I've always wondered why it wasn't in Atlanta, and I'm glad to see that it is. And it'll be the typical storyline. Now, I think that for Georgia in particular, I mean, Georgia's going to be a runaway favorite in the Eastern Division, and so that's going to be a big. Who's going to challenge Georgia? There'll be a lot of talk about that. There's going to be the resident Saban and Alabama talk, who's going to rise up and trip them up. There's going to be the West versus East talk. It looks like the Eastern Division might be the weaker of the two again, and there'll be a lot of talk about that. There's some new rules going on. It always is led off with Steve Shaw, the director of officials, and he usually tells us something we didn't know, or some things that they're doing to adjust the new rules, the kickoff rules, and all that kind of stuff. So those will be some of the subject lines, but mainly, for Georgia, it's going to be, can you find the leadership required to, repeat as SEC Eastern Division champions and handle this, easy schedule? Let's just say it like it is. That's what everybody thinks Georgia has, is an easy schedule. Is it a red carpet back to Atlanta for Georgia? That'll be a big storyline, not just for the Eastern Division riders, but for the Western Division riders, too.
Oh, Chip, it's great to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We appreciate the work you're doing there at Lake Oconee this week. We'll look forward to more of your coverage. You mentioned some comments from Shane Beamer. I know Kirby Smart's going to have some interesting things to say as well, and we'll look forward to speaking to you here on DawgNation Daily again very soon, too.
Good deal, bud.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really fascinating stuff from Chip Towers there, and you hear him at the end talking about SEC Media Days next week. I think SEC Media Days is more of a media thing than a fan thing. But nonetheless, if you are a fan of college football, you should know that next week we will hear from some Georgia players, and we will hear from some Georgia, we'll hear from Kirby Smart, the other SEC coaches as well. Many of them will have things to say about Georgia. So next week, even if you're not, all that interested in the sort of media part of SEC Media Days, just know that the big names in the sport will be talking next week, and there'll almost certainly be some news to come out of that. So next week should be a pretty fun week, and Chip Towers, Mike Griffith, the entire DawgNation team, going to be all over that next week. Looking forward to that. Let me also here, before we get going in full with our SEC Through, kind of follow up on one thing that Chip Towers said about Jake Fromm there. And, my concern, I mentioned this. Y'all know that I sort of do this show from the perspective of a fan. This is a show by a fan for other fans. And I think the one thing that, as a Georgia fan, that I do think is I'm holding my breath that the news on Fromm's hand doesn't turn out to be worse later on than it sort of sounds to be now. I kind of explained my feelings on that last week, but let me just sort of follow up on this by saying, there was a story back in 2007 with Tim Tebow, who was also dealing with an injury to his non-throwing hand, where he talked about the difficulty of taking snaps from shotgun, the difficulty of doing handoffs with the non-throwing hand there. And you start thinking about August for Fromm. Now, the benefit that he has in comparison to a lot of quarterbacks who deal with these kind of injuries is that Fromm's injury occurs a month before practice begins. But if this lingers at all, then is he less than 100% for the first couple of weeks of practice? I don't think that slows Jake Fromm down. I think that Jake Fromm can be just fine in September if he doesn't get the full complement of practice in August. But I do think there are Georgia players who would benefit from practicing with Fromm. And maybe this is all much ado about nothing, and Fromm truly is completely healthy by the time August rolls around. And he's right back there and doing everything that the starting quarterback of Georgia is supposed to do. But ultimately, Fromm's presence at practice as a second-year returning starter is not so much about making himself better, although that's part of it, but it's also about making the people around him better. There's a replacement for Javon Wims coming. Remember the chemistry that Fromm had with Wims a year ago, those back shoulder throws? Who do you find that with here in 2018? I think that's an important thing that can be learned in the early going of practice, and I hope that Jake Fromm is fully healthy for all those summer practices to give Georgia a chance to do that. With that said, let me dive into our SEC Through here. Let me start with some recruiting news. The opening was last week in Frisco, Texas. They've now kind of come out with some of their post-opening superlatives. They've got an all-offensive team here, and there are a lot of interesting names on this list. A UGA commit in Jaden Hazelwood makes the list. That's no huge surprise. There's a Georgia recruiting target, John Emery Jr., the running back from Louisiana, who it seems like Georgia's kind of in the mix for here. That's not going away. He also makes the all-tournament offensive team. And there are a couple of Auburn commits on here, too. The wide receiver, George Pickens, and the quarterback, Bo Nix. And Nix is sort of quickly kind of getting some of that talk as maybe one of the quarterbacks that looked the best at the opening last week, one of the best quarterbacks in the class of 2019, maybe the quarterback of the future for Auburn. I think the fair question to ask here is Nix the best quarterback in a year that's sort of down for quarterbacks, or is this truly the next big quarterback at Auburn here? Malzahn is good when he has a quarterback, not so good when he doesn't. I think that beyond Jarrett Stidham, I think Malik Willis and Joey Gatewood, the two other quarterbacks currently on the roster for Auburn, for me, they leave something to be desired. So Nix being good is going to go along with determining Auburn's future once Jarrett Stidham's out of the program. Speaking of Jarrett Stidham, he's got some news to announce this weekend. I guess he puts this out on social media, that he's getting engaged. And I think some people are going to say, oh, Lord, why can't you worry about football here going into a crucial season? How about you leave the engagement for sort of after college? I mean, in general, I think getting engaged after college is probably a good idea for almost everyone. But in terms of being focused, maybe this makes him more focused. I don't know. It's sort of a weird timing of this. But Stidham getting engaged here just a couple of weeks before the start of summer practice there. So congratulations to Stidham and his soon-to-be wife here as they've made a pretty significant announcement. I have to admit, I think this is a pretty juicy story. There's a little bit of drama involving recruiting for Florida. Jacob Copeland, the incoming freshman wide receiver for Florida, one of the centerpieces of that 2018 class, looking into some of Florida's struggles with its 2019 class, and right now Florida's ranked outside the top 30 when it comes to recruiting. He says people aren't coming because they don't want to compete. How's that going to sit? I mean, why is it that Florida always has the most like vocal players on social media saying sort of not team-approved stuff. Now, I guess in a roundabout way, you want unfettered, interesting comments here, but it seems like Florida has a lot more of that going on than other people do. I can't imagine Dan Mullen loved Copeland's tweet on that. And Copeland's a guy that just now arrived at campus. He's only been there for like 2 days, and he's already stirring up trouble. Not to be outdone by that, a 2019 receiver Micah Pittman has apparently been given the promise of early playing time at Florida, and a lot of that's based on the simple fact that Pittman told Trey Wallace, who's a good reporter covering college football, that the receivers that Florida currently has can't learn the offense, so therefore they got to put him in and play him right away. Now, that's probably typical, hey, come here, you can play right away talk. This is how bad we need you stuff that coaches say all the time. But that's another comment from a 2019 receiver that makes the current receivers at Florida not look too good. It's a lot of drama for a program that's had too much of that over the last year, but I have to admit I do enjoy every single bit of it. Let me give you one more story here. Phil Steele, the college football analyst, goes on WJOX, the very good sports radio station in Birmingham that talks a lot of college football. Steele says that he thinks Alabama, in its regular season now, is going to be favored by at least 17 points in every game other than the Iron Bowl. Still a favorite in the Iron Bowl, just not by 17 points. And I don't necessarily doubt that from Steele here, and I guess I'm curious to see how much Georgia is in the same regard. Now, remember, Alabama goes to LSU. He's got him a big favorite on the road there. Georgia does the same. I don't think the odds makers will favor Georgia by nearly that many on the road at LSU, but kind of an interesting statement there from Phil Steele in that regard. We'll make that your SEC through. All right, good to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. I've got a Dog Day Q&A I want to do just in a moment, but can I go back in time to early in the show, something that I sort of ran out of time for a little earlier? We were talking about James Cook, and I told you before, I'm not incredibly fluent in Instagram, but I believe there's a James Cook Instagram story that seems to depict him now in Athens, sort of getting acclimated to college life, becoming well acquainted with many of his incoming freshman teammates. That all seems to be good news. And now you can sort of start to let your mind wander now that he's seemingly officially on campus here. At least that's the appearance the Instagram story gives you. You can sort of start letting your mind wander here about what it is that Cook and the other incoming freshman, Zamir White, might one day look like together as a tandem of Georgia running backs. And could they be just as good as Sony Michel and Nick Chubb have been over the course of the last 4 years for Georgia? Well, it wasn't that long ago that right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, we asked Jeff Sintel this question, to sort of compare these two. And Jeff gave a very provocative answer about why these two running backs might eventually have even more success than Nick Chubb and Sony Michel did. You may have heard this before, but if you're a Georgia fan, this is worth hearing again. Jeff Sintel, very high on this incoming tandem of freshman running backs. Take a listen to this.
Well, if you look at the ratings and the pure talent that's going to be coming to Athens, I think everybody there is in the same weight class, in the same kind of category. But the main thing that will be different for both Cook and even Zamir White is, remember, John Theus was the only five-star that guys like Chubb and Michelle got to run behind. There could be a line formed in Georgia in the next 2 years where a bulk of the carries for both of those young men might come behind a line that includes 3 five-star prospects. And I'm not even counting the freshman wire-to-wire starter, Andrew Thomas.
That's an exciting thing to think about right there. I mean, and I think that Jeff's right about that. I think that offensive lines make running backs better. We've seen great offensive lines make average running backs look like really, really good players. Can you imagine what seems to be as much good stock as two running backs could have in the case of Cook and White? I mean, these guys are already pretty impressively put together. They're only going to get more physical and more gifted, so to speak, as they go through the strength and conditioning, the nutrition program at Georgia. And they're going to be running behind that offensive line, an offensive line that looks right now on paper to be about as much of a sure thing as you can get over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. That's an exciting thought to think about for sure, and it's one of the reasons why Georgia fans have been crossing their fingers in hopes that James Cook would arrive on campus. And now it seems that's exactly what has happened. All right, Dog Day Q&A time, and we love doing the Dog Day Q&A each and every day here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. For those who listen to the program, of course, you weigh in to me on this on the Twitter feed, at DawgNation Daily on Twitter, and I love reading your responses there, interacting with you. I enjoy the chance to get to do that each and every day. For those of you watching on video, we'll do some live comments on this as soon as our regular broadcast is done, but I also want to go back in time to the beginning of our show where we talked about Demetris Robertson. And I tried to make my case off the top of the show today why I thought that Robertson was a player worth waiting for Georgia. when you look at the small number of true five-star receivers we've seen in the last half decade of recruiting cycles, and the fact that very few programs have gotten more than one. Georgia in a position here to maybe get 3 here. By 2019, you could have 3 five-star wide receivers on the Georgia roster. That, to me, is a big-time potential addition for Georgia. So I want to find out from you how much you think Georgia needs Demetris Robertson. And I will look forward to reading your answers as a part of our Dog Day Q&A throughout the day here on DawgNation Daily. But for now, we'll have to wrap up our regular broadcast here. And thanks for being with us as always. And thanks for being a Gator hater. We love the idea of a good Georgia fan being a Gator hater and thinking about the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. We count it down every single day. And by the way, how much did you love some more recruiting drama? I mean, Florida's just like a drama factory. It's like a soap opera every single, Mullen has not done a ton to change that in comparison to what Jim McElwain seemed to be dealing with. I do enjoy it. I won't lie to you about that. And something else I'm going to enjoy 110 days from right now, Georgia beating Florida again. It's our Gatorade Countdown right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Also, when you heard from Chip Towers earlier, he was in Lake Oconee. Now, I'm doing this live during the 10 a.m. hour. My assumption is that Kirby Smart may be speaking right now. A lot of topics for him to get to. I'm sure he'll weigh in on Jake Fromm for the first time officially, and then maybe some more on some other issues as well. So check that out at DawgNation.com, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on DawgNation Daily. And for those of you with us on video, what I was trying to get out there and sort of ran out of time on this, I'm curious if Kirby will talk about D'Angelo Gibbs some more today. Will he talk about Natrez Patrick some more today? At one point in time, Kirby was allowed to officially speak on Demetris Robertson. I don't know the fact that Robertson, I guess, signed a letter of intent from Cal, with Cal. I don't know that changes that. Prospective student-athlete here, maybe Kirby's now prohibited from speaking again about D-Rob, so we'll see how that goes. Ryan, a lot of Facebook comments coming in here. Let's get ready to dive through these. Trey Duke says we don't want him. I think he's meaning Demetris Robertson. I think that's crazy, and I love Trey. Trey's a good commenter. He's a very active participant in what we do here on DawgNation Daily, but it is just flat wrong to say you don't want Demetris Robertson. And I've got no personal tie to Robertson whatsoever. But the kid had like 700-something yards playing at Cal, and you say that's Pac-12 defenses. That's fine, but he's still running deep. He's catching those deep passes, deep throws. I mean, wouldn't you agree that's the one sort of thing that's been kind of missing from the Georgia offense here? When you start looking ahead to being, everything the true national championship contenders are, that true vertical threat, I think it's important to bring in. Having more than one of those is crucial here. I mean, I think that the wide receiver position is no different than any other for Georgia. It's about stockpiling talent. Get 3 in the hopes that 2 of them are good. And frankly, I don't care which 2 it is. I'm pretty, I don't have favorites here. I just want 3 really good ones in the hope that I can find 2 that can really, really play. It's a numbers game. It's a numbers game. Somebody says in the comment section that they would rather face Fromm over Fields. The comments are moving pretty fast here, so I couldn't quite see who that was. As a defensive coordinator, meaning that you'd rather game plan against Fromm than game plan against Fields. I think that there's obviously an issue with game planning against Fields that makes him really coveted. The fact that he can also tuck it and run when a play breaks down. That's one of the main reasons why Georgia wanted Fields, because he brings that dimension to the table. But I personally don't believe that the absence of the sort of true dual threat capacity for Fromm makes him easier to game plan against. Because the one thing that Fromm does, and go back and watch the Rose Bowl, it's a perfect example of this. When you game plan against Fromm, you're also game planning against his ability to change plays the line of scrimmage. Maybe Justin Fields is going to be just as good at that. But you can see moments in which Fromm either changed from passing play to running play, or changed. I think there's a specific example of this in the second half where he changed from running play left to running play right, and Sonny Michel ran for a touchdown. And I do not believe an Oklahoma player was within 100 yards of him, which is probably not the best video to show for Lincoln Riley's desire to tout Big 12 defenses. But, I mean, that's what Fromm brings to the table. And Fields may be just as good. And if Fields is just as good at that, then he's a better player, right? I mean, Fields is the dual threat guy. He has the stronger throwing arm. If he proves to be able to read defenses as well as Jake Fromm does, make decisions as well as Jake Fromm does, then at that point in time, Justin Fields may just become the superior player. But as it stands right now, game planning against Fromm also means game planning against his ability to sort of play chess against you. It's sort of like the poker player, the chess player who's thinking 3 moves ahead. With Fromm, the game plan is, okay, I'm going to show him this, but when he changes to this, here's how our defense is also going to evolve here as well. What appears to be, man coverage drops back into a zone, or a bunch of football language that I'm probably not, equipped to discuss. But that's what it really kind of comes down to is Fromm's ability to sort of make you do something different than you initially tried to do. I think that's a pretty important part of what he brings to the table. And listen, I'm still seeing, some negativity on Robertson here. I'm assuming that's solely based on the extra drama. I think it's fine not to like the extra drama. But as I said last week, though, one thing I try not to do is be hypocritical. Because when Quay Walker took his hat off and threw it, the Tennessee hat, and ripped off the clothes to reveal the Georgia gear, and he put on the straw Georgia hat, which I've always sort of loved as a piece of memorabilia anyway, putting on the straw Georgia hat. I mean, I love that. And so if I love that, then it would seem wrong for me to sort of begrudge Demetris Robertson for doing a commitment video. I sort of have to be one way or the other here. So I've sort of chosen to be, I don't want to say embrace all of this, but I'm not turned off by it. I mean, in the end, this is all supposed to be sort of fun and entertainment. And even the kid last week that trolled Georgia in his commitment video for Alabama, I didn't have a huge problem with that. I mean, it's just, this is all pro wrestling. I mean, that's all it is. And I'm sort of okay with that. Nick Lurch and Drew Miller kind of talking the same thing about the potential knockout punch of having both Fromm and Fields. And if there was ever a way to use both of them, and I'm sort of in the old school where you say if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. I don't even know if that's true. It's just what we grew up hearing. But if you ever could find a way to use both these guys together, not on the field at the same time, but just sort of in concert with the same offense, it'd be pretty tough to stop. I mean, think back to the Georgia-Clemson game in 2002 when, Georgia probably doesn't win that game against Clemson in 2002, despite the fact Clemson was not a great team. Georgia probably doesn't win in 2002 without the contribution of our great friend here on DawgNation Daily, DJ Shockley, who really brought the running component to that game there that day. Kind of fun to think about both Fromm and Fields getting involved somehow, in that regard. Alaric Lindquist on the Facebook comment section says it would be bad if Alabama got Demetris Robertson. It would. I think part of what makes that bad is just the fact that he takes away, a potential playmaker for Georgia. Alabama's going to have its 5-star receivers. They're one of the programs over the last 5 years that has had more than one. They've had Judy and Calvin Ridley, but you also count, Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith as very high 4-star wide receiver type players. So they've had multiple 5-stars, but they're sort of taking a guy off the board that could be used by UGA or another potential rival, but we'll talk about Georgia on this program. Over here on YouTube, Diedrich Frazier says, as a talent, I want him, but has anyone ever done a commitment video as a transfer? I will certainly agree with Diedrich on this on YouTube, that the commitment video for transfers is sort of a new thing here, but we're also about to probably start seeing a lot more transfers around college football, and maybe what seems so weird now won't seem too weird in the future on that regard. Plus, I mean, once again, I think y'all are free to think whatever you want to think. I think for me, though, I feel bound not to be a hypocrite. So it'd be one thing for me to come on the air and say, how dare these kids make commitment videos for transferring? But you better believe on Saturday, I'm going to have that. I don't have my phone with me right now. It's charging. But you better believe I'm going to have that phone out waiting for that video to drop. I'm going to want to see it. So for me personally, it feels a bit hypocritical if I were to be critical of a transfer doing a commitment video and pretend that I'm not interested in it when deep down I'm going to be glued to the screen to see it. Kevin Blackman, critical of me for the lack of T-shirts, which is totally fair, completely fair. I'm going to try to do better, but I don't want to make a specific promise because I've broken those promises before, and I am sorry about that. Cliff Payne on YouTube says a lot of UG fans are just gun-shy with D-Rob because of being spurned the first time around. He would be an asset for sure, and I agree with Cliff on that. There's a little bit of a gun shyness or, just anger about unrequited love from back in 2016, but not to be too philosophical here, and I apologize if this veers in that direction. This is sort of the agreement we make as fans. The moment you choose to care, there is going to be a moment of disappointment, right? You care about the team on the field, they lose, just stinks, right? I mean, bad mood the next day. We put a lot of credence into the decision of recruits, and then they choose a different school, and it just it's just not fun for the next sort of 24 hours. But there are also going to be a lot of other battles to fight here, commitments to gain, signatures to be earned here, and at that point in time, all just sort of works out the way that it's supposed to. But I've never been too worried about my own personal feelings here. I mean, y'all have heard me after losses, and you've heard me after commitment decisions go the wrong way. I'm disappointed. I have always, for better or worse, sort of worn my emotions on my sleeve a bit, but I'm also not afraid of kind of diving back in there again. Crow King 123 asking about the rumor of Georgia and Clemson having a 3-game series. Okay, so I saw a tweet about this, and with all due respect, it was from a Twitter account that I'd never heard of before, with no sort of specific data whatsoever. So from that standpoint, I didn't put it on the show today because I'm not sure where this comes from, right? I mean, and listen, I've got no problem with fan-oriented blogs or independent websites. I have no issue with that whatsoever. A lot of my good friends are independent college football media type people, so this is not a specific issue with an independent outlet here. But the Twitter feed that produces this is a Twitter account that I've not heard of, and it was, honestly, I hate to say it this way, but it just seemed designed to get retweets without really offering much in the way of specifics. So we've already heard from both Dan Radakovich and Greg McGarry that they're in talks about one day playing again. I've told you before that I think Georgia and Clemson is a series that should go down. Some of you would rather play some of these sort of out-of-region teams. I think that's a reasonable argument, but I think that Clemson's a team that Georgia ought to play here. But the particular tweet that sort of starts the rumor about Georgia and Clemson, I didn't gather from that there was anything new there. I also think it's weird to think that Georgia and Clemson would do a 3-game series. There is nobody getting an extra home game between these two. It's just not. Would they play a home and an away and a neutral? Maybe so. But with all due respect to that tweet, I don't think there's anything to that. Keith Fold says, did you find out anything about the West end zone? I don't have anything new to report on that, but we are going to keep talking about that for sure. And hopefully at some point in time we'll be able to get in there. Crow King 123 says, true, you got to be careful of untrustworthy sources. And for me, I'm not going to say that the Clemson tweet was an untrustworthy source. I'm just going to say that it resembled to me the kinds of tweets that you see pop up from time to time. They're about retweets more than anything else. It didn't really pass the test for me, but who am I to say? This is an interesting comment from Stacy Goebel on YouTube, who says in 2016, Robertson not coming to Georgia was Georgia's loss. But in 2018, Robertson not coming to Georgia would be Robertson's loss. Hope he makes the right decision this time. I think it's a pretty interesting comment from Stacy Goebel. I think he's right. In 2016, Georgia really needed Demetris Robertson. In 2018, Georgia may be fine without him, but it'd be nice to have him. I think that's pretty well said here. And I'll go back to what I said during the regular broadcast. And maybe some of y'all can put something in the comment section on this. I sort of get the tie to West Virginia because of the Jake Spavital connection. I obviously get the tie to Georgia given the fact that they were a finalist in 2016. Is there any real tie to Texas or Alabama here? I mean, Alabama's sort of in the mix for everybody, so maybe that explains Alabama. Is there something to explain Texas here? I'd love to hear from you on that. I know some of the other Georgia outlets had talked about maybe Ole Miss being a potential suitor here because Ole Miss also has a former Cal coach on its roster. Ole Miss does not make the finalist list here. Is there a connection to Texas and Alabama? I'll admit that I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't, but I really don't know what the tie to Alabama or Texas would be. Stacey Moreland talking about the idea of actually it's John William Adams talking about the idea of a hardship that being back in Georgia with family in LaGrange and Savannah, it'll be a little bit easier to sell a hardship if he comes to Georgia more than anywhere else, and that may be true. I'm also not an expert on this, transfer rule and, how likely the after being granted a medical redshirt one year, being granted a hardship the next year, I will not pretend to be an expert on that. If he could even be eligible in 2018. Matt Silver says, do you know what time the SEC Media Day start on Tuesday? So the event itself is an all-day deal. Georgia's portion of the SEC Media Days, I haven't heard yet, but I believe there may be a release out about that now. Let's see if I can find that quickly. It's never a good thing when I start typing and talking at the same time. But let's see if we can find the Georgia schedule for Tuesday at SEC Media Day. All right, so for Tuesday, looks like Georgia's going to go between 8 a.m. and 12:15, according to release from the SEC, which doesn't narrow it down too much. I do realize that. But Tuesday morning until your lunchtime, expect to hear a lot from Georgia, which means we'll obviously be kind of in a tricky position on Tuesday. We'll be on the air potentially when Georgia's speaking, so I don't quite know what we'll do about that. That'll be an interesting bridge to cross once we get there. Willie McGuire says that Georgia's going to go undefeated in 2018. Boy, that'd be nice to see. Love to see that. Drew Miller says for the Florida game, we should tie an alligator tail to a pickup this year. That's kind of funny. Gary and Christian Gulasano brings up an interesting point that in terms of, Demetris Robertson bringing him back in the fold here, that Georgia's done that a lot here, whether it be, the one name that he really mentioned was Brenton Cox. I mean, Brenton Cox was all Ohio State. Adam Anderson was an LSU commit. I never took that all that seriously necessarily, although I was disappointed when he made the flip. Justin Fields at one point in time looked like he was gone. I mean, just long gone. And then even as an uncommitted player, it seemed like he might be, flirting with the Auburns, the Florida States of the world, and Georgia welcomed them back with open arms. I think that you don't get your feelings hurt easily in recruiting is probably the best strategy. And, any kind of hurt feelings from Robertson back in 2016, there's business to be done here in 2018. You sort of get over that kind of quick here, and I think that's exactly what's going to go down. I mean, ultimately my pick here, I guess, is Georgia, but that's probably not worth a ton. But that is my pick. Let me try to get one more before we get out of here. I've gotten a little bit better about managing these Facebook comments, although I will admit they are just, in general, much more difficult to deal with than they used to be. We get one more here. Try to find a good one here to get out on. Jeff Hensley says, I don't see, going back to the idea of a Georgia-Clemson series, he says, I don't see Clemson and Georgia setting up long-time matchups in today's college football environment. As long as teams are getting in with easy schedules, nobody's setting up these matches home and away anymore, maybe a neutral site one. I will say, though, I mean, you don't really see that many teams with the absence of the big non-conference game. I mean, Alabama's played one every year. Clemson plays a lot of these, including Auburn the last 2 years. So the idea of the easy schedules getting the college football playoff, almost everybody has the token non-conference game. And in the case of like Clemson, they've also got the in-state rival of South Carolina. So, easy schedules here. Georgia would be a bit of a test case in 2018. They don't really have that marquee game. They've got one coming in 2019 against Notre Dame. They don't really have one of those for 2018. So I mean, I do think there's a motivation to play these kind of games. Clemson's playing Texas A&M this year in College Station, after all. So there is, I think, a motivation to play these kinds of games. And the other thing I'll say about why I would sort of want to make Clemson a part of the rotation for Georgia, in addition to these out-of-region games like Notre Dame that Georgia played last season, folks, Clemson's not going anywhere. They're recruiting really, really well, and people are buying what Dabo Swinney's selling. I mean, if Georgia's going to battle them every December and February, you might as well battle them during the fall as well. Now, these two teams will probably eventually play in a college football playoff at some point, but you may have to take them down a peg during the regular season to sort of up in some of their recruiting momentum, because unfortunately, it's kind of real at the moment. But it is sort of fun to talk about these kinds of things. The idea of Georgia getting creative and scheduling the most interesting games possible, I think we all sort of hope that's what the future looks like for both Georgia and possibly the rest of college football as well. It's great to have you with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. It's a true thrill to speak to you each and every morning here. I'll see you at 3 p.m. this afternoon for SEC Country Live. If you missed a portion of our podcast, you can find that on all the podcast channels. It'll be up right after the show's done. Also on the radio in Athens today on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Rev. Check DawgNation.com throughout the week as well. Chip Towers, really good stuff, along with Mike Griffith from the Kirby Smart speaking engagement, or at least media availability as a part of the Bruce Arians golf tournament here today. There'll be no doubt some good stuff come off of that. And then tomorrow morning, back here at 10 a.m., I will be live with another edition of Dog Nation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. I'll look forward to speaking to you then.